One thing that we're going to talk about here is just data visualization, so making of those graphs. And one thing just to keep in mind is that this is a graphic that was done by a physicist, actually, but it talks about speed. So the way that our brains work, and we process information the fastest through our sense of sight. That's the big blue here. So the fastest internet for us, or the fastest way that we get information as people, is through our eyes. The next closest is this pink one, which is touch. So when we feel things. Then the next one is hearing and smell. And then the final one is taste. So of all of our five senses, the thing that gets us information the quickest and processes the fastest in our brain is sight, which means that when we can put a pattern or a trend or something into a graph or a data visualization, that is going to be the most effective way to communicate something to our audience. They're going to process it faster. Obviously, we need the narrative to then explain it more. But if you set up a graph right, it just clicks in a brain. They can see the comparison. They can see what's happening. And so that's why it's really important that you don't just write things in text, that you actually show it, because that's like a weapon that you can use to get your message across. When we develop these, though, it's the same thing with our analysis, is that we need to think of who the viewer is and we need to adapt it. We'll make it complicated or less complicated based upon that. So what we tend to see with data visualizations, we have different types. I'm going to just focus on these first two. So there's the types like static, which is just like an Excel spreadsheet. So you think about when you have your tables and you make those graphs and that sort of stuff. Interactive data visualization is more like a Power BI or a Tableau, where you basically, as you manipulate one graph, all the other ones change, and it's a real like interactive. Infographics you can use in terms of women bigger than men, if like there's more women than men, or like that kind of thing, where you kind of take your information and put it in to make it tell a story. That's very effective. But I'm focusing more today kind of on the first two data visualizations, which is really around these graphs. It's a matrix that helps you identify, based upon what you're trying to do, what is the most effective graph to get that apart. And again, some of these are super complicated. I don't really even understand them. And some of them are very familiar. Pie charts, or a camembert chart, as you would say. Depending upon what you're looking to do, I think one of the most common errors I see a lot of times is people using like a pie chart for something that has multiple different variables. And that's not, you only can use a pie chart for like a whole. Or so for things that have multiple different parts, you would need like a bar chart. And so this allows you to ask, what are you trying to show? Are you comparing? Are you doing a composition of a whole, a relationship, or a distribution? And then based upon that, like depending upon, do you have a whole bunch of data? Is it just a few categories? Like which of these graphs are going to be the most effective way to share your information? This can be a good tool to help you figure out which graph is going to be your best. And then finally, I think the other thing you need to keep in mind when you're doing visualization, actually, there's three principles, is that you actually show your data. And that means that you present it in a way that is showing the point you're trying to make. A lot of times you'll see a graph with 100 million dots on it, and the point that's trying to be made is really up here, but we include all the other data. Whereas you need to simplify it in a way that's not manipulating, but at the same time allows the person who's looking at it to see, oh, this is the point you're trying to make. I can tell what you're trying to say because I can see, my God, that is a very big graph. So you need to make sure that the way you set up your graph actually shows the point that you're trying to make. Again, you need to make sure that what you have in terms of the setup, so the graph bars, just really clear again, so you can see the pieces of information you're looking for. That can make that whole beauty of like how the site works and helps us get the message across. It loses it because people then have to start thinking, and no one wants to use their brain. Like they just want to be able to see things. And then the third one is the integrating text. So making sure that we label things so that people actually know what they're seeing, so that they see the trend and then they see the words that go with it, so they know what that means. So these are the main things. So The tool that we have at our assets that really is a useful tool for us. So some of us will have Power BI. We're going to talk about that later. That'll be part of Dataport. We'll talk about that in a different session. But one of the tools that we all have is Excel. And I think we all use regular graphs, but I think one thing that we don't necessarily always use enough are pivot tables. There are tables that as the data changes, the table will change. I use it so much for analysis because as I'm walking through those steps, so I'm going to compare by age, and then I see that, and then I can change the table, then say, I wonder why that age, and then I put other factors, and it allows you to really manipulate and look at your data. But it's only really appropriate with certain types of data. When you've got horizontal data with headers on top and unique IDs, and luckily, this is the reason why I'm bringing up pivot tables is because this is really how a lot of our tables for the tools that we most often use are set up. So proGres exports to Excel like this. So there's headers, and then we have our proGres IDs. So you can use pivot tables with that. GBV IMS does the same. CPIMS Plus does the same. So if you have data that's automatically set up like this, or if you've set up a table you can use pivot tables, and it really is a strong, strong tool that you're going to want to do for analysis. This is going to be stuff that's going to be really helpful for you for that type 2 through 4 analysis. So I wonder why, because it allows you to play with it in real time. And what it does is basically, if you have a table like this, so this is what I was talking about horizontal, these are our IDs, and these are the headers, and then each line is an individual unique case. If I was to highlight all of this data and create a pivot table, it's going to create a table here that's going to summarize then all of these different headers, and I then can basically look at every single different variable within this table.